Welcome back to For the Love of Humanity, Season 3, Episode 10. So, this episode is about practice, power, and play. I love alliteration. It's about relationships, it's about practicing power and moving into resilience and perhaps releasing the grip on what power means and what power is for us, but not prematurely that we have felt like we've had to give a stage up or give something up, give a phase of maturation up um, for the appearance of moving through maturity faster. And so those are sort of the things that I want to talk about this week. And I'm going to channel a little bit more. I'm going to ad lib a little bit more. I have some notes. This is usually how it goes. It's just today I have even less notes. And who knows, perhaps that will result in having a shorter episode. Let's see, because I've certainly been attempting to become more concise. I listened back to some of them and I'd like to be more concise, but I also love to take a concept and hit it from all angles, like look at it from all angles, like it's a precious jewel with many facets. And if I cover all the angles and I look at it from all the perspectives, then perhaps there'll be more epiphanies to be had, that it will land differently for different people. It will cover more bases and resonate as more generalized wisdom to be shared. And so that's why they seem to be somewhat repetitive or cyclical. Like I'm aware that I talk in circles a little bit and bring it around. And sometimes I'll listen back and there'll be a thread I was going on. I'm like, oh, didn't pick back up on that one yet. But if you're paying attention, 10 minutes later, there it is. We've picked up the thread. There it is. So today I've got my tea with me. I'll be taking some little sippy breaks to have my tea. For those of you curious cats, it's Earl Grey tea, cream of Earl Grey, with A2 milk from EB Manor, and my husband's very own whipped honey. So that is my delicacy. I've got some incense burning, just creating a vibe, creating a mood, creating the mood where I relax and enjoy the experience. And that's a little bit about me, but I would love to know, I would love for people to reach out, send me a message on Instagram. Where are you listening from? What do you enjoy? How does it hit? Who are you? What do you like? Who are the people who are drawn to listen to this? Who are you? What do you like? What do you got going on? What's your world like? And what are you into? What are you interested in? So please don't hesitate to reach out if you feel the impulse as I say that. You're like, yeah, I might. I'm the type of person that generally welcomes random conversation because I know it's not random. It's all meant to be. So the last few weeks, I have been really focusing on victimhood. And it's interesting because when you go on the healing journey, obviously we're healing something. So we feel victimized by the thing that's created the challenge, contraction, dis-ease, the misalignment of ease, the detraction from self, the detraction from what feels good to be like locked in and plugged into our soul and feeling like we're ascending and we're doing the thing and we're having the life that we enjoy and it feels fulfilling and it doesn't feel like a waste of time and it doesn't feel like, what the hell am I doing here? And not to say that it won't in certain moments, but just like that you generally take peace and comfort in the fact that life feels enjoyable, rich, and purposeful. So looking at victim aspects is really interesting because it's hard to feel relaxed while we feel like we're continuously being bopped by circumstance. Like it's just, we can't get out of the way and it just keeps hitting us and hitting us and hitting us and hitting us. Kind of kind of like maybe being on a tube, being pulled by a boat. I've got another like feeling of like you're in the water and you just keep getting hit with wave after wave after wave. We One time we were on a beach and this wave came in and caught me hard. And I was wearing sunglasses that I shouldn't have worn into the water if I wanted to keep. And the wave, I was on an angle and it just took me out and I fell on my back. and my top's coming off and my sunglasses are about to fall off my head. So I'm trying to manage two things and I'm trying to get up and another wave just came and hit me. I think I got taken down 3 or 4 times. It was hilarious for everybody else who was on the shoreline watching, like my family, my kids thought it was funny, but it just felt like, for the love of God, I'm trying I'm trying to regain stability here. And you're just handing it to me over and over. And at a certain point, I'm laughing too. Water's up my nose. I know you know the feeling of water going in your nose and the burn and like the like, and you can't catch your breath and you're coughing the water and it won't come. It feels similar to the time that my dog like clipped the back of my bike and took me out. And I'm wearing a set of headphones listening to a podcast, and the dog clips the back end of my bike. I like skid. I try to hold on, but just like then go limp and just fly off the bike, sort of like skid down the gravel road a little bit. And then the dog comes up and like snatches the headphones off of my head, like rips my hair out at the same time. And I just felt completely vulnerable in that moment. Like, oh no, was the only thing. Like, oh, pick my bike up, walk back to my house while the dog's like ready to play some more, thinks we're wrestling, thinks it's a fun wrestling time. Like, oh, finally, mom's interested in wrestling. And I'm like, tearing up, like tears are streaming down my face and I'm shooketh. I'm just walking like a little bit shocked, like what the hell? Like what I am thinking of Alfred Hitchcock, The Birds, like the woman being attacked by a ton of birds, but not that dramatic, but just feeling tenderized by life. Same with the waves, same like that experience. And, but it feels nice to have that experience and then have a nice laugh about it, as opposed to being like, I'll get you, like, something's festering inside, which I will say, I've been there before too, or like I had this weird thing when I was a teenager, like thinking how I think now, the belief systems I have now, obviously attracting circumstance to learn from, but it seemed as though I was like a friggin' ball magnet. Like if I went to a football game to watch with my friends, somehow I'd just be in the wrong place, because it's happened like, I'm not going to say a ton of times, but probably 4 or 5 times in my life where I was at a sporting event football game. I think mostly high school. I don't think it happened to me when I was older. Maybe once when I was like in my 20s and 30s, where like a ball magnet where it just hit me and I just remember being embarrassed. Meanwhile, like what are the odds? What are the odds? Yeah, all there is to do is to feel like slightly embarrassed for a second, let it process, shake it off, move on. But it is a weird thing when you're like, out of all the people here, how? So anyway, looking at that victim and feeling about like, how long does the victim get to take up residence? How long does it take to honor the victim and not make the victim feel rushed? Like, okay, time to go. Got the back of the chair, dumping you out of your chair. It's time to go. Time to go. This is not my normal operating mode. I don't like being here. And that's how I felt in the beginning of the work. And I remember having a conversation with my somatic therapist, and she's like, well, you'll know when you let go. You'll know when you do it. When you let go, it's a different feeling. Like you just haven't let go yet. I'm like, how can you tell? Because here's your coat. What's your hurry? Get the hell out was the feeling about some of the processing of emotions. And then I tell you, I do everything full force. So then letting them in and letting them flow has also been a very like, don't interrupt me when I'm processing. I'm at a crescendo moment of processing this emotion. Do not interrupt me to say, are we going on the walk? Do you want to talk about this during the walk? Because I'm at a peak moment here, and that would be like, trying to stop someone during a sneeze or an orgasm, and it makes no sense. It's silly. So this victim experience, even like re-listening to my podcast, sorry for my dog in the background, even re-listening to my podcast about the field trip and like understanding my perspective at the time and coming clear, and now reflecting on that perspective and being like, huh, interesting too, the fact that it was even something. Now, because I've become so aware, and this was a conversation I had with my husband recently, because I'm like so aware and I've been focusing on it, I've been looking at it, it feels like it's all I see all the time. I'm so very aware of what's going on in my head. I'm so very aware of my thoughts and my emotions now. And what a full circle moment, because I remember when I first became aware of my thoughts like that in the inner narrative, and I'm like, oh my God, make it stop. This is too much. I'm going to go crazy. I can't have a shower where all I can hear is my thoughts. Ew. It was like, it was too much. It was overwhelming. And then it became like, oh God, I don't like what I see. I want it to be perfect. And then like, oh goodness, there's stuff I'm not even hearing. It's not even heard. It's like just a literal background drone of a feeling, which I identified as belief systems, or like the deepest layer programmings that just like tainted a situation, like the stain of a situation, right? And then there's like the relational experiences, and so that's why this week is focused a little bit more on relations and relationships, because I'm talking a little bit louder to block out my dog barking, because I'm on a roll. I don't want to stop and tell her to stop barking and pull her in the house. But there's all kinds of birds in the backyard. So, and she's a Doberman. She has a big chest. Her bark is deep. She's loud. Anyway, so relational experiences, it's now moving from really self-processing and being very self-aware, and knowing that there's still areas where I'll have blind spots, or there are blind spots, but ultimately accepting that that's the human condition, and having a lot of self-love around that. So now that I'm relaxing into more and more self-love, relaxing into more of the expanding expression of an internal relationship with myself, wonderfully, loving it, thought it was a destination, thought it was like a piece. And again, I've said this before, I understand there are discernible points in which you can tell you're at not a plateau, but it's almost like a moment where you decide to look back and take stock. Because if you don't, one, you're not realistically in touch with where you, like, how do you figure out where you are in terms of where you've been and how far you've come? And there's a aspect of reverence that you can retrieve from that. There's a celebration that can be had once you take stock and you look back and you have that moment of, oh, okay, yeah. You get to redefine yourself in those moments, so that perhaps the perspective you held of where you were at and how far you'd come, you get to edit that and be like, actually, I'm here now. And that's fantastic. Like, it used to feel this way. I actually don't. That story actually has to go. I've been telling this story that I'm still XYZ, when actually I've evaluated my behavior and I'm not there. I'm not experiencing that. That doesn't feel real. It doesn't actually feel like me. It feels like an old story that's still being told about me within my own experience and perception. So coming to those moments is not necessarily a plateau, but a moment where it's a decided stop for you to celebrate and look and take stock and really reground in the reality of now. Because reality is always moving. It's not like it stops. It's always moving. And we get to put our own personal milestone markers in place when we feel, oh, okay, it's time to really enjoy the fact that we've moved forward, or we've moved up, or we've moved into expansion, or something that used to be triggering feels alive. There's aliveness in places where I used to have to shut down a little, or there's risk taking in places and it doesn't feel like a huge risk, and at one point it felt very scary, or just that evaluative piece you get to look at. And then once you're there, you also are simultaneously already experiencing yourself in relationships, but perhaps you shift the focus, or there's more availability and capacity to get even more expanded in relationship. So whereas before, relationships might have been a little more triggering, or you might feel as though I've got to watch my footing, or I have to watch my balance, or there was things I was experiencing in a relationship that I didn't like, it didn't feel good, and I first had to identify it, and now I'm walking in new ways. And that was taking practice for a bit, because when I'd go into older relationships or old experiences, I'd slip back into old ways that didn't feel so good. And I wasn't really aware of how to make the shift. And now I've been making practice. And since practice now feels good, and that feels like the ground underneath me, what next? What kind of relationship experiences do I want to enjoy? Or what kind of relationships am I looking to bring into my life now? Or what's the potential? What's the potential for creativity? Like, what really feels like what happens is, after we've dealt with what felt to be a drag on the system, we get to reinvest the new energy or the capacity, the expanded capacity into greater experiences. And that's just mirrored throughout life. That's just the way life is. When we free up our energy, we get to put it towards new heights. And the more and more we do this process, we realize, oh, I am in charge in more ways than I thought. I am able to create and design in more ways than I thought. I am creating this reality, actually. And so when we first start hearing that, that might feel really like, what the heck does that even mean? Or we might be annoyed at that fact because our reality is not something we're enjoying. And then as we start to heal, it can feel very overwhelming to start taking responsibility for all the areas and all the feelings and all the thoughts and all the emotions and all the things that are reflected back to us and all the places we've previously invested. And so to have that responsibility feels very heavy. And then eventually, when you work with it and it's in your favor, and the more you release and the more you accept, and the more you release and accept, you can learn, and the more you release and accept and learn and shift and grow, potential is freed up. You feel like you've detangled a lot of what felt very confusing or crossed wires or messy or whatever. And so, with that freed up energy, you get to aspire. With that acceptance, you get to move into aspiration. With that acceptance of what previously felt like a limitation, you get to start looking at using that limitation almost as a foot ledge for the next thing. And so for me, naturally, that feels like relationships. And I spoke a few podcast episodes back about the fact that my son's in my seventh house. And I like to add in astrology. By no means does it completely define me. It's not that serious. Do you know what I mean? I see its effort. I see its effort. I see its use value. I see the reality of it. I understand the grandness of it. And at one point, this is how we understood time. Like, I don't take for granted the weighted historical significance. And for people who are like new agey, oh, that's new age. Astrology is not new age. Astronomy is not new age. It is like the markers of time before we had the modern systems of markers of time. So it's something that I have a deep respect and reverence for, and yet at the same time, it's not becoming my dogma. It will not be my dogma. I also know that because I believe in an evolutionary perspective as well, I hold history and tradition and the understanding of foundational building blocks. And I understand that those foundational building blocks are meant to be the stepping point to evolve from. So you have to allow for equal parts structure, foundation, disintegration, and evolution. There has to be that interplay of both. It's not even that has to be. That's what it is. That's what the backdrop of our experience is. It's equal parts building, destroying, building, evolving, building, dissolving, creating the new, keeping what works, building off of what worked, burning it down, like recovery of forests. Like, think about all of the ways in which it's overlaid for us to pick up and know and understand and see. It's repeated throughout our experience that this is the way it goes. So the recognition of that allows me to look at the fact that there's a tandem experience, if not a multiplicity, like tandem being two, but really it's a variety. It's a full multidimensional experience with multiple layers going on at the same time. And when that becomes less stressful, it almost feels as though you're playing the greatest instrument on earth, the most elegantly designed, instrument on earth, which is the human body having the human experience. So moving from singular to multifaceted would be like moving from the singular awareness point of the person doing the healing work, moving from a state of victimhood so that you can go and interact with people and understand what's yours and what's theirs, not feel victimized by relationships, not feel frustrated and triggered to the extent that it's overwhelming your system and your nervous system. Like, many of us, I think, went through this experience from 2020 on of, you see it all over social media. What was the wine culture of 2015 or 2012, even arguably, up to 2021? What was the wine culture joke was then the see you later, I'm under a blanket hermiting joke, which is just indicative of where we're at as a society. Many people at that point felt overwhelmed by social anxiety, which was just another form of anxiety, but they started to understand their own anxiety and their own general anxiety and their own triggers. But then being around people, perhaps for some who were specifically opening up to this perspective and becoming sensitive. Like when you develop a new sense, you're sensitive. You see the people who, get their glasses or their prescription, or children who get, hearing aids or glasses, who have had a more foggy vision or like harder time hearing, and the clarification of that, it almost seems like it's a little overwhelming, like being in a dark room and then going into a light room and you have to adjust, right? So becoming so sensitive and realizing, having that level of deep self-awareness, that means when you're out with people, you're still hearing that self-awareness. So you're trying to have a conversation, but you're hearing all the narrative and the stuff that you've already been working with, and you've got to integrate all that so that it doesn't become like, hold on, I'm juggling 8 things at once here and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And it's more of an integrated, smooth system. So it becomes easier to go out and have those social interactions again. And it doesn't feel like, oh, I get overwhelmed in social interactions, so I kind of go off into my own world, or I get overwhelmed in social interactions, so I'm needing to take a break in the bathroom every single time. And those are all wonderful tools. I'm not saying that they're not wonderful tools. What I'm saying is they're not sustainable forever. Like eventually you want to be feeling like, yeah, like this is my boundary. This is the amount of time I go for, but I'm certainly not putting myself in a taxed situation every time I'm going to have social interaction. And that's all about practice and integration and knowing yourself and knowing what you need. And, if you need a high level of internal quiet time, that's totally fine. But if you also recognize, you know, that's been helpful for me, but there is a part of me that recognizes that I'm actually a very social person and I want to be out socializing, but it just felt for a long time like it was very challenging to continue healing work and then go out and feel like my healing work was like disintegrating in front of my eyes because I went into scenarios that triggered me heavily. Like I'm okay. I'm not triggered when I'm at home by myself. But as soon as I go out there into the world, into Costco or into, a dinner situation with, 30 people, I'm feeling like, whoa, flooded. So that's taking our experience, feeling empowered, realizing that it's not a power grab and it's not about like power per se, power urges, and that it's actually just like in a resilience that melts into a simple enjoyment of whatever the scenario is, because you realize you're a creator, you're huge, you're compassionate, you're resourced, you're fine, you're more than fine, you're here living it and loving it. So that's how my perspective is oriented, when at one point it was very oriented around healing anxious tendencies and dealing with depressive tendencies and dealing with the internal voices and narratives, and then dealing with the perfectionism of wanting to be just like healed. But for me, anyway, that expectation was somewhat influenced by the obliviousness and impulsiveness I had in my teens, where what I felt so confident in my teens, definitely. And I was also oblivious to a lot of stuff in my teens, but I was very wise. Like, I'm not going to act as though that time was underdeveloped by any means, because I think we can learn. And I think we do a disservice when we assume. It was funny. My kid brought this up once where he's like, the way that person was talking about young people made it seem like young people, just because they're younger, aren't smart, or that their opinion isn't valuable. And it was a really interesting moment because I'm like, you're right. You're right. The way that people talk, the way that was said, and the way the impression that gives is to assume that you can't learn things from people who are younger because and we know that not to be true. But has our culture placed a value on it in listening to younger people and listening to the perspectives? Like, they're literally living the life too. Is their perspective on the life not valid? How have we just assumed it's ignorant or underdeveloped? And it might be underdeveloped terms of like time on the planet. They haven't experienced certain things, therefore their frame of reference might not be as robust for a certain experience, but it doesn't mean that they don't come to that same experience one time and have some astute observation or something intelligent to offer. So I do look at that time period of myself as having wisdom that is serving me now, but I also realized there was a certain amount of me that was over, maybe a bit more impulsive and a bit less self-aware, and that provided me with a level of moving forward at a pace that felt like confidence. And there was a self-assuredness based on lack of self-awareness, which, regardless, the quality of the feeling to me was like smoother, right? And then when you slow down to start to look at things, of course, it doesn't feel as smooth. It feels like, hold on, break, what's that? Okay. Hold on, break, what is this here? Okay, I'm feeling that. Okay, interesting. So it's felt like gas brake, gas brake, gas brake when you slow down to look at everything, because you're zooming in on things as opposed to like just flying above the surface. So, okay, bringing it back, releasing the victim. And I would say, because collectively, as I said, we're in this experience where a lot of people can relate to the just being at home. Like I said, I had plans, but actually, this is what I want to be doing. Or when I said I was busy, this is actually me under the covers, like covers around my face. Like, so we all are kind of, when something becomes a cultural meme like that enough people share and relate to, it's obvious that the shares, the relatability, the resonance means that enough people are experiencing this thing and saying, yeah, that is the true, valid. I feel that, right? And if that's the case, then it gives you a little barometer at where we're at generally. Where are people at? And there are groups obviously that are there, and then there are groups that are like not there, and then there are groups that are way over here, or you know what I mean? Because socio-cultural experience, niche groups, or even mass consciousness, even like you're always going to have things that seem to pervade the mass, the macro scale, and then you're going to have subculture, and then you're going to have generational culture. So you always have those nuances, but there's certain things that seem to transcend the various groups as a collective experience. And one of those things seems to be, social anxiety, or finding it awkward to be in social situations now that we have a greater self-awareness. Before, when we could ignore that we didn't like certain things, or when we could just go along with it out of people-pleasing tendencies, or because we just, valued something else outside of ourselves a little more, or compromised far too much, or didn't realize that the compromise was creating a weird resentment internally that, if we actually looked at, it wouldn't mean that we wouldn't compromise anymore. It just would mean that when we compromised, we made sure that it felt clean and clear so that we weren't holding a resentment on the other side. And so coming to terms with all that is big, while still trying to interact with people who maybe want to come to that interaction and be the same old way that they always were with you. And then you're like, this is awkward because this doesn't even feel like me anymore. It feels like your reference point is talking to someone who I'm no longer. So like almost like talking to someone who's constantly looking sort of over your shoulder and off in a different direction, like as if that's where you are. And you're like, but no, I'm here now. I'm here, but we can't seem to line up with the eye contact. We can't seem to align with where we both are in this moment, because we're in two different spots almost. So as I was bringing up the whole I'm going to be at home under the covers kind of feeling or vibe, is partly still feeling a victim experience. And it's funny because even victim has become nuanced, so you can use it against people, and then people can be empowered by it. That's anything though. Language and labels have always been something to, depending on the perspective, to be used against or used for, to use to empower, to use to disempower, until you stop becoming, disempowered by language, until you decide that language is not characterizing all that you are, and then it becomes like just a tool, just a color in the crayon box that you can use for something. So the victim experience, when we're still feeling like overwhelmed by something and not in our vital power, and not necessarily power, but our vital ability to just be accepting of the situation or be in joy, be neutral, or even be overwhelmed and just be accepting at the fact that we're overwhelmed, right? There's various levels of that. Um, Demonstrate kind of where we are with our victimhood. And usually a deep victimhood is like you feel blindsided by everything, and it feels like the external is coming in and closing in on you, and our reference point for pain is external, not internal. It's always the outside. It's only the outside. It's not internal. It's the outside is overwhelming. The walls are closing in, you know. And sometimes when you start to locate that internally, it still can feel a little bit suffocating. Like, oh my God, my walls are closing in on me. I'm feeling like I'm spinning. And that I'll say that's where a big chunk of my victim experience felt like locked inside my own head, locked inside me, my own consciousness, the beliefs, thoughts, patterns. That was like sort of my shadow area that felt like it was ropes and chains in a cage at times, right? And so for me, that was the biggest thing to get through, was the mental entanglement. That felt like really hard, really hard work, because it felt like it was hard to see, and it felt like it was creeping up on me, and felt like it was something I didn't have control over in the beginning, and I didn't have autonomy over, and it felt bigger than me, as opposed to something that was part of my experience that I could maneuver around and maneuver within, and I could dissolve, and I could start to gain clarity on. So that victim experience, however you experience it, whether it's feeling victimized by circumstance, victimized by your body, victimized by your mind, victimized by the state of the world, and just being in a world that feels like this, which would be like a more existential, like deep to the core. Do you trust being alive? Do you trust being here? Does the world feel like an unsafe place? And right, like there are external experiences currently that affirm that. So it wouldn't be like, oh, that's crazy, that's all in your head. It's not like that. It's just more, so how do I exist? How do I be? And how can I possibly be with that experience? And is it making me feel like I have nothing that I can do but go under the covers? Or can I still go out and experience life and not be boiled over with overwhelm? And so victim experience currently is very complex. It's very unique, as everything. Our experiences are unique to us. But there's a lot of victim baiting. And I would say social media sometimes does an interesting job of that, where you can notice that your victim will get baited quickly. Like there'll be videos on TikTok where people are talking to you, like, using examples where they're talking directly to you, and maybe they'll tell a story about how men treat women, and you're like, whew, flared up. You're hot. Like it got you. It like a little dangle of meat in front of that cave, and that victim wolf was like came out and like snaggled up that that piece of meat. And like there are times where it's like victim baiting is really like elusive. It's just slow, and it's like kind of like, come on here, come here, and then suddenly your victim's like perked up, and you're like, whoa, that's weird. Like 2 hours ago, I'm like getting ready to go for a run, and I'm feeling like this, and I watched this video, and now I'm feeling like, fuck this, you know. And it can be like a rebel call. It can be like, but the thing is, are you left feeling empowered? Are you left detached from your feeling and sense of being at home in your own body after the thing happens, after the victim baiting happens? And like, how many times do you want to get yanked out of your feeling of home in your own body for something you've seen in the external? And for me, that's when I realized, oh, that's not for me. I could like get riled up in a second. Like I and I explained it to my boys, because they are very they are very interestingly justifying why they get in fights with one another, and how it's the other person basically having control over them. Like, well, he knows how I feel about this, and he'll do this to me. And yeah, well, he knows that he's using this against me. And I'm like, try to explain it to them. Like, are you giving your game controller to this person? And whenever they press the button B, you jump or you get angry. Like, they know what response to get out of you. So they push that trigger willingly. And we do this in close relationships. We do it when we're pissed off at the person from a vindictive state. We do it when we're not realizing it. Sometimes we do it to show the person, like, hey, you've got a trigger here still. Like, can we work through this? Because sometimes I'd like to have an experience where we go and do this, and it doesn't feel like it's taxing you to this degree because I care about you and I know you're more sovereign than this. That you get to be yourself without feeling like whatever wind blows is just going to take you away like a plastic bag in the wind or like a napkin on a beach. And so this victim state, it's I think in my first two stories where my example was like I fell off my bike and I was like, no. Like there's that experience of victim. And then there's the experience of victim that feels like, fuck you. I'm divesting from this. I'm boundaried up. Fuck you. There's resentment. And you can feel something underneath it. So is the victim experience, and again, none of this is wrong. Never trying to say you're wrong. But how free does that feel? How sovereign do you feel in that experience? Because I certainly don't feel that sovereign when I can be walking through life having a dandy thought or just at least being peaceful. And then something can come in my mind and I can feel enraged, or I can feel like something's pulling me into a place that I don't actually willingly want to go to. So is that victim feeling as you're healing, does it feel like there's a victim residue, like a residue of vindication or frustration, or I've got to change, or I got to use my power over a situation, or I got to claw my power back? Or does that feel like a residue? Does it, so like it's just like a hint and it's something that you're aware of, but it's not necessarily interfering with your ability to feel solid in yourself as you go through life? Is it more of a rope where you feel like it can yank you? You could be doing life and this rope could just have a strong pull and you just whoop, be pulled. Does it feel like you're caged by it? So there's like different nuances or different feeling and connection and attachment, or um, different feeling of different ways of relating to the way you feel victimized. And as I said earlier, my mind was creating a lot of entanglement and emotion. And it was like inducing a drain, right? But then again, your mind can also create thoughts and emotions that can be motivating. So again, not hating the player, hating the game perhaps, and not like making it wrong that your mind does these functions, but understanding that your mind is yours. It's your tool. And you get to retool that tool to work best for you, and not by bypassing, because that wouldn't actually be best for you, because bypassing or ignoring just means we're like creating a mess on the floor that at some point we're going to have to deal with, or there's like a festering thing in the back that we've like been feeding sort of with junk but like not actually looking at. Like your sourdough starter's just gone rancid and you keep feeding it and you keep the lid on it and you shut it in the basement and suddenly like you've got a sourdough monster crawling up the stairs threatening to eat you. So not in a way that, we abandon the things, but we look at it, we clear it out, we purify it, we deal with it, we release the stuff we cannot control, we accept the things that we cannot control. We work through that relationship with self so that we have a clean, pristine feeling for ourselves internally, which then we can use our mind for emotion like that create motivation within us, right? Because we do there's feelings that come from the heart, and then there's mind induced emotions that can motivate us, that can get us up and going. And if you notice, your mind can use like competition thoughts of like, well, so and so is doing this, and you might get a short-term hit of motivation because of that. But at some point, that's not a like sustainable permanent solution for feeling good or feeling like we are enjoying life, because at some point, if the competition is coming from a place of lack, you're going to have to address the lack will have to be addressed in the lifetime, whether it's now or later. And you can sense the lack because there'll be a residue, there will be some sort of tell for you to see it. And as it gets fainter and fainter because you've dealt with it, it can be something that you just notice or recognize. And then you begin to notice that it's not showing up in as many situations because you're not necessarily feeding it. Kind of like 3 episodes ago or however many episodes ago when I was talking about everything you do has an intention behind it. and it's connected to something. Otherwise, it would be irrelevant and it wouldn't be in your experience. And when you do that thing, think of like the light bulb of progress or the light bulb of regression. And when you're feeding that energy in, what light bulb is it hitting up? That's like a psychic highway, a psychic like intuition, using your vision to go down the line thinking, if I planted these seeds now, what kind of fruit would this tree bear? But doing it fast. Like if I'm energizing, which light bulb am I energizing? This one or this one? And you should be able to get a hit. One will feel like light. You should be able to see, what am I energizing here? And where are my intentions connected to which light bulb I'm energizing? And so checking to see whether you can look at your mindset and how you're energizing different aspects. Which aspects are being energized? Are you feeding the victim still? Or are you feeding the sovereign empowered version of you that's here to enjoy life, but also not going to be broken down completely by the things that come your way? You're still resilient, you're still living, you're still going to continue existing, and you're going to exist in a way that feels good for you because you're a self-determining human and you get to have that choice. And so, what's a drain? What's a motivation? What's inducing that feeling of drain? What's inducing the feeling of motivation? What are the more permanent feelings and values you have that are coming from your heart? And having that awareness of self to navigate that, to to be involved at that level with your development and your growth. And so having this awareness and knowing how to walk that line, I want to talk about that in terms of balance, and balance being like the pH, right? Or even thinking about blood balance in terms of different things that show up in your blood and whether the blood's thin or thick. You want to look at balance in terms of like more isn't always greater. Like less isn't always greater. Like so having balance for me feels like not too much obsession with awareness, so that now it's obsession and drama, right? And now you're again hyper fixated and hyper focused on the victim, but not having any awareness, so that you've got a skewed perspective of who you are. And then to the point where I'm not aware of what's triggering me, and now I'm in public and I'm being triggered a lot, and I'm just thinking it's all external triggers and it has nothing to do with me because I'm not actually looking at it because I don't want to look at it. And now I can't have relationships, or my relationships are always chaotic and dramatic because I'm not looking at the internal stuff. And I'm not willing to admit that I'm a victim here, even though I'm feeling victimized constantly by my external or my environment, right? So that would be a completely skewed perspective where you're not looking at it internally at all. And then as I said, the obsession of looking at it internally so much so that you've basically cannibalized your own confidence and self-esteem, or you've cannibalized your ability to um, think about anything else, see anything else, have fun in life, have little joys in life, take things lightly. Um, and then the lack of awareness, the internal trigger. And so with the lack of awareness on the internal trigger, not doing any of the work, this has come up recently in many conversations and just like observations with people, and seeing that, if they're not looking at the trigger, it sometimes can mean that they've assumed that the other person is the fault. And seeing that the other person is the fault and the trigger, although might feel empowering because they're like, boundary here, boundary there, this person over here is pissing me off, this person's the problem, there, you're the problem, they're the problem, they're the problem. And when we do that too much, we think that we're being really strong and on some crusade of like boundaried up, but it's to protect a frail internal. And like, then we become frail to the external. And we can't experience non-resistance. We actually end up feeling very much tangled in a resistant experience. So really understanding that it has to be a balance. We can't hyperfixate on this internal awareness. And I came from a place of unawareness I would say I've always had a decent self-awareness because I've always been studying it as part of like HR, in terms of consulting, being aware of personality profiles such as emotional intelligence quotient, Myers-Briggs. I've always been aware to a degree because my environment would show me when I wasn't. But I did have a defensive strategy that would sort of protect me from it and almost prolong the experience of true self realization, true self awareness, rooted in self acceptance and self love. So the perfectionism would sort of allow me to do so much self awareness, but it would feel so hard to not get it perfect. And I really didn't want to look at the lack of self acceptance. I didn't realize that the perfectionism was hiding a layer of lack of self acceptance and lack of self love and a high need for control so that the environments can feel a certain way. And it's interesting because I don't think I've left that totally, but I've come to understand that it's okay to have preference as well. Even though I'm not trying to control every scenario, I do admit that there are some scenarios that I enjoy more than others. Like I'm not totally um forgoing the human experience for a spiritual awareness and a non-active participant, or a participant that just sort of gets pulled from one direction to another. And so balance with all this, it's all silly too. Like it can be deep and it can be the work and it can be progressive, but just know that we can also take that too far and we can almost weaponize it against ourselves. We can weaponize our personal development journey against ourselves and chastise ourselves and then become obsessive about that. So we're not necessarily just looking to trade one obsession for another because we think the other is healthier, although it can be a step in the right direction, just like, creating ritual to crowd out a habit, to crowd out a bad habit with a bunch of good habits can be really fantastic. But when now they become the doctrine or the dogma and you can't function without them, then it's now out of balance and you've clung too tight to something else. You've become fanatical about something else. You've traded an addiction or a lazy habit for a good habit that now has become equally cannibalizing of your flow and your flexibility and your ability to be open to receive the impulse to evolve because we're holding too tight one way or another. So it's all silly and the mind can cling and we can have moments where we surrender big chunks and we're like, this is, I finally let go. Cause sometimes that's what it is. Life is just like smacking your hand against it. Like you're holding on to something in your palm and life just takes your forearm and just keeps smashing your hand off the counter to be like, let go, let go, let let go. You made this deal with me that you never wanted to like contract so hard that you calcify. Like, let go. Just let go. Let go. I don't know how to let go. I don't know how. What do you mean let go? How the hell do you let go? And it's the thing that your mind can't do. It's the thing that sometimes you have to get tenderized into until you pick up on the vibration of it and you pick up on the quality of the experience. And then you just know. You're like, oh, like, you know how to let go. You've been in a warm pool before where you just float. You know how to let go. You know how to let go. It doesn't, it's not by virtue of the ego and the mind. The mind does have to let go, but the mind can't get itself to let go. So, and sometimes this type of release can happen, as I said, and so you can surrender big chunks and make huge pivotal life moments because you decided to surrender at the perfect time to just let the thing go. And you notice that, oh my God, when I stopped forcing, when I let it go, when I released, you created enough balance. You pulled away from one of the extremes and enough to be in a balanced center point for something to shoot down the channel towards you. And other times it can happen in stages. It has to happen in stages, right? For some reason, it's not all at once. And I want to really, I think the next episode is going to talk about paradox and walking that line because I want to really address the fact that it's not totally all. That's why balance is so brilliant. It's not like, it happens in stages and it can happen in big chunks and it can happen all at once. It's like, it's not prescriptive, and yet there is no limit. So it can happen all at once, or it can happen in little chunks, or it can happen in big chunks, or it can happen in like, I had this near death experience and everything changed, or like it can happen because by the grace of God, something outside created a situation where you had to let go. And it can be that you've determined to change something and you're moving with it and you're making little movements and you're trusting that what's coming to you is teaching you how to surrender and let go more and more. So it's never just one or the other. And that's why when, you listen to people in self-development podcasts, it might sound like they're saying one thing one week and another thing another week, but it's all nuance. It's when to release, when to hold. It's not always hold and it's not always release. It's when to do those things. And so the other thing would be in relationships, accepting the other person. So having your boundaries and understanding what you're looking for in that relationship and accepting the other person. And one thing that I'm big on is like accepting to the point of accepting that there is God in me and there's God in you. So I cannot look at you as if I'm right and you're wrong and that's just it. Like as a person, you're just, everybody has God in them. And I was saying a couple episodes ago, this is a reflection I had. I was listening to it and I'm like, I can accept that in myself and I can accept that in the other person. But in reality, I don't even have to accept it in the other person. It's literally a fact. So I'd be extremely pompous if I thought that that's in me and I have to learn to accept that it's in the other person. It's in the other person, like it or not. And it's in the other person even if I see their behavior as ungodly, because again, that is my perspective. Now I might feel like, oh, I've got an elevated perspective on virtue though. Like I literally know that God is love and God would treat people with love. So if this person's treating someone with like total harshness and horrible behavior, then clearly that's not very godly. Their actions are not very godly. Like what's that Kanye song, Not Christ-like or whatever, talking to his dad, screaming. And what's interesting about that is it's very revelatory for me to see where I have decided what God would look like in human form and how God would treat people in human form. And there's such a spectrum because how God would treat people. What if God was one of us? That who? Joan Osborne. Anyway, if God was in human form and was treating people a certain way, I'm assuming it would look a certain way. But that's all perspective as well, because is that person even aware that how they would assume God would act? And are they even aware that God is acting through them? And in the moment that they're doing something, are they like, I am God and God is acting through me. And now I'm choosing to raise my hand to you in a violent way? Like, I don't think so. I don't think that's even going through their head. They're animalistically acting on impulse, and then there are some people that are premeditative about that type of stuff. And again, this is all semantics. Can I judge? Yeah, I have the free will to judge. Do I want to judge? No, because as a tenant, I'm looking to like release that, because it's that the catch-all of judgment is creating some like chaos for me. So I'm not interested in energizing the chaos goblin of judgment in my experience. However, I can see a behavior and say like, that doesn't feel good for me. And my body's telling me that I don't want to do that behavior because it doesn't feel good for me. And I don't want to do things that don't feel good for me. And somebody else might come around and be like, well, sometimes you got to do stuff that's not good for you, or that doesn't feel good to you, but it's still the right thing to do. And again, we're getting into all this entanglement about who says what the best life is to live and who says what the righteous life is to live. And let's boil it down to what's godly is the opportunity to exist and choose. We are all bestowed. Whoever is here living right now is given the opportunity to come exist and choose their life, right or wrong, good or bad. They are allowed to be here choosing their life. And so the judgment beyond that is like just human. It's human judgment. There's no, only God can judge. Like, yeah, I can judge if I want to. What's the point? What is the point? Do I think I'm righteous? Like, waste of time. So I've just decided there are experiences that just don't feel like the best use of my energy, and I get to choose what the best use of my energy is. And so I put my energy towards balance, and I put my energy towards releasing the victimization and releasing the victim perspective and releasing the criticizing and critical perfectionism, and but also understanding that I'm going to notice nuance and I'm going to notice, and I have discernment. So when I look at something and I'm like, oh, That doesn't look like that. That doesn't look like this over here, this perfect version of whatever. Like now I'm talking about a specific a window tint that my husband got done on our car, and one looks better than the other. And it was almost like, you know, why the critical eye? Why point it out? And it's like, why does it bother to point out? Interesting. Like I just noticed it. Just I have an eye for it. So at some point I have to accept that I've developed a critical eye. And if I want to stop feeding it, if I want to dissolve it, if I want to, like, what does that look like? Does it benefit me to keep it? This keen awareness, this internal awareness that I've gathered, I catch myself doing things and I can see it almost in real time where it's like, oh, do you realize you did that for this motivation? It's like, oh, why? I don't want that. Oh, okay. And then is that a great use of my time? Sometimes, because it gains me great benefit. Can I have that awareness without entering into an internal discussion, an internal feeling of like, oh, more work to do on myself? Like these are the little things that come up now where I'm like, okay, great. But also, at what point do I exit the hyperfixation on healing, personal development, and stream back into living, stream back into more balance around living? Well, if I'm still feeling like victimized by my external, I have the opportunity, the very fact that it's showing up for me is ding, ding, ding. You have an opportunity here to look at this and decide, can you accept this or not? How much resistance to this are you willing to continue feeling and having? Is that what you want to do with your time? Is that it's coming up anyway? So when I see these little awarenesses that are an interruption to my peace in any given moment, I get to look at it and I either get to practice acceptance, like, oh, how interesting that that's there. Yeah. And the awareness means that I might act differently in the future because I had clear awareness around it. I wasn't contracting. I wasn't like, oh God, that's got to change now. Or I don't want to look at that. That's uncomfortable. Like balance is just in the middle. I see it. Okay. Do I spend more time on it? No. Do you know what I'd rather talk about? This meme where the parents are leaving their phone set up in the bathroom and they tell the kids, go say all the bad words you want. I'm not going to be in here. And the kids are saying the most hilarious things into the phone. Maybe I want to talk about that for a little bit. Maybe I want to laugh for a little bit. Maybe I want to think about the time I fell off my bike and I felt very mousy afterwards and very like, no, maybe I want to think about the time that I was on the beach and I got taken out by a wave. My top fell off and, people were like, we were there to surprise my parents, and thank God that they didn't look over in that exact moment because it was already going to be a moment burned in their brains that we surprised them on a vacation that they didn't realize we would be going on. And here we are on the beaches of St. Martin in a remote location. And suddenly I see my parents and I'm waving and the wave takes me and I fall on my back like a turtle and I spin around with my top falling off. And they're going to be so excited to see me. But you know what? I just want this moment to be with me standing upright and my top on, like I'd rather think about that, have a little laugh about that. So get some balance, do the work. Don't let the work boil you over. Don't let the work make you feel victimized, because that's not right. When you start to do the healing work and now you start feeling victimized by the healing work, there's a little too much doubling down in one area happening, and we need to achieve some balance. And balance is fantastic. Balance is great. And there are moments that you decidedly move out of balance and into one of the extremes because you want to put the gas on or you want to, accomplish something. But it's nice to be in balance because the systems get to work nicely. Like think of a car being in balance. It's nice. It's nice to have your wheels balanced. It's a nicer ride. It's a nicer experience, right? And balance is good for the sake of everything running smoothly, at least for a certain amount of time. All right. Well, that was the episode this week on power play. What it ended up being an episode about practicing awareness, balance, and victimology. So thank you for being here. As I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, if you feel like reaching out to me, by all means do so. I'd love it. I'm at Femist on Instagram, and I appreciate your time. Have a fantastic day.